They laughed when she spoke. They mocked her accent, her pauses, her silence. But none of them knew. She could understand every single word they whispered about her. Because the girl they called the mute foreigner spoke more tongues than any of them could imagine. This is the story of how one student turned humiliation into mastery and left even her professor speechless. The classroom smelled of chalk and rain-soaked coats. The fluorescent lights hummed above, too bright for the early hour. It was the kind of morning that made silence feel heavy, almost visible. And at the back of that room sat Lina Morais, the girl who rarely spoke. She was new. No one knew exactly where she was from. Her name suggested somewhere warm, somewhere that sang when it spoke. Her English was careful, deliberate, wrapped in hesitation. When she tried to speak, her accent softened her consonants and rounded her words. The others noticed, and they laughed. Not the loud kind of laughter. The cruel kind that hides behind half-smiles and whispers that slice the air like paper cuts. Did you hear her say 3? It sounded like tree. She can't even say th properly. Oh my God, she's so cute when she tries. Each comment was a needle. Lina didn't flinch. She never did. She'd learned long ago that reacting only fed them, so she stayed silent. Her professor, Mr. Turner, either didn't notice or didn't care. He was the kind of man who loved the sound of his own voice. Perfectly British, polished, predictable. Language, he often said, pacing the room, is not only what we speak, but how we speak. Precision is culture. Then his gaze would land on Lina. You understand, Miss Morais? Every time her answer was the same, a small nod, followed by silence. At first, her quietness made her invisible, but soon it became entertainment. When Turner asked her to read aloud, she hesitated, trembling, but obeyed. The early bird catches the worm. Her rhythm was broken. The class snickered. Even Turner smiled thinly. That night, Lina walked home alone. The city was cold and wet. Neon lights trembled in puddles as she watched people whose words flowed effortlessly. For a long time, she thought silence was safety. But now it felt like drowning quietly. In her tiny dorm room, books lined the walls, grammar manuals, phonetic charts, language guides. Her laptop glowed with a video, How to Master Accents, British versus American versus Australian. She repeated every word after the narrator, her voice shifting like water taking any shape. Water. Wata. Woder. Wata. Again and again, recording, replaying, correcting. Her mirror became her only audience. Determination replaced exhaustion. Sometimes she whispered to herself in 5 languages: Portuguese, French, Spanish, Italian, Russian. No one at the university knew she was already a polyglot. English would be her final blade. Days turned to weeks. The laughter didn't stop, but Lina changed. She began to listen, really listen. Every voice was a code. Emily's stretched vowels, Jake's nervous flat T's, Turner's exaggerated R's. Her silence wasn't empty anymore. It was observing, recording, sharpening. Every insult became fuel. She didn't write down revenge. She pronounced it. Late at night, she read aloud, Shakespeare, news articles, her own invented lines. Her voice changed every few minutes. British, London Street, American, Irish, Australian. She wasn't mimicking anymore. She was becoming. Then one morning, Turner announced a new topic, the power of accents. He joked through bad impressions. The class laughed. Lina watched. The Scottish accent, he said, is tricky. They drop their R's entirely. Lina froze. Her pen stopped. That wasn't true. She'd studied the rolled R of the Highlands, the guttural vibration of old words. She looked up, calm. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She felt ready. That's not right, she whispered. No one heard her, but it was the first crack in the dam. The first note in a symphony that would end in silence. Not hers, but theirs. Because Lina had stopped being afraid of her voice. And when she finally used it, she would make them all listen. And what happened the day she finally spoke would change everything. Morning came heavy. almost suffocating, with a gray light bleeding through the half-open blinds of classroom 204. The air smelled faintly of chalk, paper, and old wood, the kind of smell that clings to memory. The students gathered one by one, dragging their chairs across the floor, their whispers blending with the tired hum of the ceiling fan. And there she was, Lina Morais, sitting in the same corner, quiet as always, her notebook open but her eyes distant. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't have to. She had learned that silence was safer than attention. At exactly 8:17 a.m., Professor Turner walked in, tall, neatly dressed, his face balanced between arrogance and exhaustion. He carried a steaming cup of coffee and a stack of books that seemed to announce his authority. "Good morning, class," he said without looking at them. "Good morning," the students mumbled, almost in unison. Turner was the kind of man who believed that teaching was performance, deliberate, rehearsed, for applause, not understanding. He liked the sound of his own voice. It made him feel superior, unshakable, untouchable. That morning's topic was regional accents in English. He began pacing around the room, explaining how language evolves and how accents are shaped by geography and history. He spoke of British elegance, American rhythm, and the Irish sing-song tone. And then he tried to imitate the Scottish accent. It was painful. He flattened the vowels, missed the rolled R, and turned it into something between Australian and broken Irish. The class chuckled politely. No one dared correct him. No one, except Lina. She noticed immediately. The wrong intonation stabbed at her ears. She'd spent nights studying the tone of the Scottish Highlands, recording herself again and again. "Scottish accent often drops the R sound," Turner said confidently. A few students nodded. Emily, the same girl who mocked Lina before, giggled. "Sounds like someone chewing words," she whispered. Lina looked up from her notebook. Something inside her began to stir. When Turner asked for volunteers to mimic the accent, Emily was the first to raise her hand. She exaggerated every sound, earning a wave of laughter from the class. Then Emily turned to the back of the room. "Come on, Lina. Show us your Scottish skills." The laughter grew louder. Lina slowly lifted her head. Her gaze met Emily's, steady, emotionless, piercing. Then she turned to the professor. Her heart was racing, but her voice came out cold and clear. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, "but that's not how Scottish sounds." The room fell silent. Turner frowned, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. "I beg your pardon?" "You said Scottish drops the R sound," Lina continued, "but it actually rolls it, especially in the Highlands. Like this." And then she spoke. The words came out sharp and perfect. Pure Scottish inflection, every syllable carved with precision. Her voice filled the room, bouncing off the walls with uncanny authenticity. For a few seconds, no one moved. Even Turner froze. How did you do that?" he finally asked. Lina's reply was simple. "I listened. It wasn't arrogance, it was a fact." Turner cleared his throat. "Interesting demonstration, Miss Morais, but accents are not exactly your area of—" "Actually," Lina interrupted, "they are." Before anyone could stop her, she repeated the same sentence in 5 different accents. British, American, Canadian, Australian, Scottish, each one flawless, each one distinct. The class went dead silent. It wasn't just impressive, it was unsettling. For the first time, Professor Turner had nothing to say. His authority, his polished image cracked right there in front of everyone. Lina closed her notebook slowly, stood up and said in perfect English, "You taught me words, Mr. Turner, but I learned how to speak them." She walked out of the classroom, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. The silence she left behind was deafening. From that day forward, no one laughed at her accent. No one dared. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Because the professor's mistake wasn't just about an accent, it was about underestimating her. And soon, he would make a far greater one. The kind of mistake that couldn't be undone. The corridor smelled like disinfectant and stormwater. Rain had begun to drum softly against the windows, a steady beat that swallowed footsteps and turned conversation into ghosts. Lina walked slowly, her notebook pressed to her chest. And for the first time since she'd set foot in that building, the eyes that followed her weren't bored or mocking. They were curious, calculating, afraid. Word of what happened spread faster than the rain. By lunchtime, strangers were whispering her name in the cafeteria line. By evening, someone had uploaded a shaky phone recording to a student forum. "Girl from the back row embarrasses Turner." The title pulsed like a bruise. The comments bled beneath it, some stunned and admiring, others sharp and spiteful, like glass hidden in bread. Okay, but who is she? How can a foreigner sound more Scottish than Turner? It sounded fake. She must have memorized a script. The last one stung, not because it was cruel, but because it was lazy. The kind of cynicism that people wear like armor to avoid feeling small. Lina didn't reply. She ate alone. She slept poorly. The faces in her mind blurred into one faceless crowd, whispering, always whispering. She closed her eyes and repeated the vowels she knew by heart, tight, flat, rounded, like prayers recited under a breath that no one was supposed to hear. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was trying to survive them. The next morning, the sky collapsed into a mist so thick the campus looked like a forgotten photograph. Classroom 204 loomed out of it, heavy and indifferent. Lina stepped inside and found something worse than the laughter she'd grown used to, silence with edges. Emily sat with her legs crossed, tapping her pen against her notebook, eyes glittering. "Morning," she said, too sweet. "Heard you're a star now." Lina kept walking, took her usual seat, placed her pen carefully beside the notebook. Routine was a raft. She would not abandon it. Professor Turner arrived late. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. His jaw was clenched. His tie was crooked, a detail the Lina from last semester would never have noticed. But now she saw everything, the slight tremor in his hand, the tightness around his eyes, the way he breathed before he spoke, like someone stepping into cold water. "Today," he announced, "we will begin oral proficiency assessments." He glanced down at the sheet of paper he held like a warrant. Pronunciation, intonation, spontaneous speech. The class groaned. "Each of you will be called to the front and given a short passage to read. Afterward, you will answer a few questions. No preparation, real-time speech." Emily's smirk widened. "Sounds fun," she whispered. Turner continued deliberately, like a butcher carving clean lines. "We assess clarity, not mimicry. This is an English class, not a theater workshop." He didn't say Lina's name. He didn't need to. The first student approached the front, read, stumbled, laughed awkwardly, returned to his seat. Another went, and then another. The routine took on a rhythm. Walk, read, mumble, sit. Turner corrected their vowels with surgical precision. He was in control again, above them, beyond them. When he finally said, "Miss Morais," the room inhaled. Lina stood. Her spine felt like ice. Heat bloomed behind her teeth. She walked to the front, each step measured, deliberate, like she was approaching a precipice she'd seen in dreams. Turner handed her a page. "Read from the second paragraph." She looked down. The text was dense, academic, dry. Something about sociolinguistic stratification and prestige dialects. It was exactly his kind of trap, impersonal, unemotional, designed to strip everything human out of the sound and leave only correctness. Lina read, clean, precise, no flourish, no accent beyond the standard neutral she'd polished for weeks. The one that fit like a blade in a leather sheath, hidden, ready. When she finished, Turner nodded curtly. "Questions. Define rhoticity and explain its role in non-standard dialect discrimination." She answered, analytical, exact. She didn't look at him. She stared just past his shoulder, at the clock ticking above the door. The seconds dripped like rain from a roof. "Very well," he said. Then his tone changed. So subtly that to anyone else it would have sounded neutral. To Lina, it sounded like a match scratching the side of a box. "Now demonstrate a Scottish reading of the first line." A ripple moved through the room. Lina felt it pass over her skin like cold water. She inhaled. "Chimes and Kai," she began softly, adjusting her tongue, letting the R roll gently at the edge of her teeth. The land still holds the echo. Oh, enough, Turner cut in. That will do. He marked something on his sheet. As I said, he added, not looking up. This is English, not spectacle. The word hit the room like a low blow, spectacle. He had chosen it carefully, something that could shame her while pretending to hold a standard. A way to put her in a box and lock it from the outside? Lina returned to her seat. At the end of class, while students gathered their things, Turner spoke again. A reminder, Friday evening the department is hosting a public lecture on language variation and bias. He paused. I will be moderating a live demonstration panel with selected students. Emily's hand shot up. Selected? Turner smiled, thin as paper. Yes, Miss Crane. Selected. Then he looked at Lina for the first time. Miss Morais, I expect your attendance? The bell rang. The room dissolved into chatter. Lina stared at him and he stared back. There was something in his eyes that wasn't just anger. It was calculation. It was theater, the kind he accused her of. Outside, the rain had thickened. Water ran down the steps in silver threads. Lina stood under the awning and checked her phone. A new group chat had been created overnight. The panel. She hadn't been added, of course. Screenshots found her anyway. Emily. He's going to make her do accents on command. She'll choke. Emily. I'll make sure she does. Beneath that, a link to the video of Lina's reading. The comments had multiplied. Impressive but cringe. Professor looked destroyed, LOL. Anyone can memorize sounds. Try thinking. Try thinking. Lina put the phone away, stared out at the rain until it blurred into a moving wall. Her hands were steady, her chest wasn't. In her mind, voices rose and fell in different shapes, different weights. The elastic vowels of Johannesburg, the clipped consonants of Manchester, the warm roundness of São Paulo English, the shadowed cadence of Dublin. Her mind was a crowded theater. She was the stagehand, the director, the audience in the dark. She had always been all of them at once. That night she didn't chase sleep. She summoned ghosts. The Russian grandmother who taught her to roll her R's with the joy of a cello string. The French neighbor who made her read newspapers aloud and slapped the table when a vowel betrayed her lips. The Italian cousin who insisted that music and speech were twins, separated at birth. Language wasn't performance. It was inheritance of pain, survival, pride. She stood at the mirror and spoke into her own eyes. Standard, then non-standard. Prestige, then stigmatized. She didn't imitate, she inhabited. She thought of a shepherd in the Highlands, of a nurse in Glasgow, of a kid on the south side of Chicago, of a miner from Newcastle who never apologized for the shape of his words. She didn't just perfect sound, she pulled time into her mouth and made it confess. On Thursday afternoon, a flyer appeared on every door. Voice and Power, a demonstration on accents, authority, and bias. Friday, 7 p.m., Auditorium B, open to all. At the bottom, in small text that pretended to be modest, moderated by Professor A. Turner. By Friday morning, the campus buzzed. Some wanted blood, some wanted magic, most wanted distraction. Lina walked through them like a shadow slipping between lampposts. Emily brushed past her in the hallway and leaned in, breath sweet and poisonous. Break a leg, she whispered, or a tongue. Auditorium B was nothing but concrete and echo. The seats filled, the whispers multiplied. On stage, 4 chairs and 2 microphones faced the crowd. One for Turner, one for whoever he called up. Power arranged neatly in lines. Turner entered to polite applause. He scanned the room, measuring it, claiming it. Thank you for coming, he began. Tonight we explore where sound meets status. How accents attract or repel respect. We will learn. We will listen. We will avoid theatrics. Laughter in the safe middle of the room. Smiles hiding knives. He gestured to the side of the stage. Miss Crane, please join us. Emily glided out like she'd been born under a spotlight. She read a passage in clean standard English. Turner praised her clarity. He asked about her Midwestern inflections. She giggled, performed humility. The audience relaxed. This was a show they understood. Miss Morais, Turner said at last. Your turn. The room tilted. Lina walked onto the stage, her shoes whispering against the wood, and sat opposite him. The microphone was colder than it looked. "We'll begin simple," Turner said, handing her a card. "Read this in your best neutral English." She did. Clear, controlled, no flourish. "Now," he continued, "repeat it in your Scottish." She obliged. It flowed easy, unforced, like a river that knew the stones beneath it by heart. A murmur, a few amazed exhalations, a few scoffs. Turner didn't react. "Next," he said, "Irish, then Australian, then South African, then New York, then Cockney." He lined them up like soldiers. She delivered them one by one, careful, respectful, exact. She did not mock, she embodied. She didn't sharpen her vowels into caricature or flatten them into stereotypes. She let the truth of each voice breathe. But Turner wasn't listening to the music. He was hunting for a mistake. "Where did you learn these?" he asked, voice smooth. "YouTube, TikTok, movies?" "From people," Lina said. "Names?" He smiled. "Sources matter." A few scattered laughs, the trap was widening. "The sources," Lina said, "are alive." He leaned forward. "So, no citations?" It was so beautifully petty that the audience didn't know whether to laugh or wince. "Tell me, Miss Morais," Turner continued, gentler now, crueler for it. "Do you think it's respectful to, what's the word, appropriate, the voices of communities that aren't yours?" A sharp intake of breath across the room. There it was, the word that could turn admiration into accusation, the word that could paint passion as theft, the word that could burn. Lina held his gaze. She felt the weight of every room she'd ever entered where her mouth was a door others wanted to lock. She thought of her grandmother, of the shepherd, of the miner, of the nurse, of every stranger who had taught her by existing. She spoke softly into the microphone. "I think it's respectful to listen, to learn, to carry forwards what is given, without stealing what isn't." Turner smiled without warmth. "And who, exactly, gave you permission?" The audience shifted. The floor tightened under her feet. That was the moment Lina understood that this wasn't about accents. It never had been. This was about ownership. About the invisible border the professor believed he patrolled. What could be said, and who had the right to say it? Before she could answer, a hand shot up in the second row. A woman in a navy coat stood, her voice steady. "I'm from Paisley," she said. What she did was right, no mockery in it. A man in the back added, "I'm from Joburg. Her South African wasn't perfect, but it was careful. That matters." The room trembled with the possibility of turning. Turner saw it too. His smile hardened. He shuffled his papers and pulled out a fresh card. "Then let's try something rigorous," he said. "Live demonstration, 5 dialects in sequence, no pauses. And," he added, the blade sliding out of the velvet, "translate this idiom across each, like for like cultural equivalents. You claim to understand, Miss Morais. Show us." He handed her the card. The sentence was innocent enough. But the idiom at its heart was untranslatable without context. Like a shadow moving at the edge of a door. She'd need more than sound. She'd need memory. Lina looked at the card. The auditorium held its breath. Her hands were steady, her heart was not. She raised the microphone. And somewhere behind her, near the equipment rack, a phone buzzed to life. On the screen, a new anonymous upload, a clipped montage. Lina's voice, Scottish, Irish, South African, edited to sound grotesque. Overlaid with laughter and captions, fake, clown parrot. The notification pushed to hundreds of phones at once, heads bent, fingers tapped. The wave began to break. Lina didn't turn around, she felt it. The old laughter returning, not as sound this time, but as a pressure. A weather system settling over the room. She closed her eyes for half a heartbeat. When she opened them, her gaze was different. Clear like winter water. There would be no safe path through this. Only the narrow one, cut along the edge of truth. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice barely above a whisper, and began with the first dialect. And as she spoke, a figure in the doorway raised a hand for attention. the usher's flashlight briefly catching on a lanyard and an ID badge with a familiar seal. One that did not belong to the university. What happened next would not be contained by that auditorium. It would spill into every hallway, every inbox, every room where words were power, because the person at the door wasn't there to watch. They were there to testify. The light from the usher's flashlight cut through the room like a blade through fog. Every head turned toward the door. For a moment, the world seemed to stop breathing. The man who entered wasn't a student, nor a teacher. He moved with quiet certainty, wearing a rain-darkened coat and an ID badge that gleamed silver when the light hit it. The seal on it wasn't from the university, it was government-issued. Lina's voice faltered mid-word. Turner noticed, and for the first time, his confidence cracked. He straightened his papers, glanced at the newcomer, and then back to the crowd. "Please, take a seat," he said, his tone half command, half plea. But the man didn't sit. He walked closer to the stage, slow, deliberate. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his accent soft, the kind that refuses to be placed. "But this demonstration concerns my department." The murmurs spread like ripples through water. Turner blinked rapidly. "Your department?" The man nodded, then reached into his coat and produced a slim folder. "My name is Daniel Ross, representative of the Bureau of Linguistic Preservation." He let the name hang there. Strange, unfamiliar, ominous. "We've been tracking unauthorized recordings and data misuse involving regional speech archives. It seems one of your faculty members has been repurposing student material for personal research." A tremor ran through the auditorium. Lina's breath caught. She didn't dare move. Turner laughed, brittle. "This is absurd. Whatever this is, it can wait. We're in the middle of a presentation." Ross looked at him calmly. "Then you won't mind if I listen?" The silence stretched. Turner gestured stiffly to Lina. "Go on then, Miss Morais. Continue your performance." But the audience's attention was gone. Curiosity had sharpened into anticipation. Lina looked at Ross, then back at Turner. And then she did something no one expected. She began to speak again. Not the passage Turner had handed her. Instead, she told a story. "When I first came here," she said, her voice steady, "I was told to sound proper. I didn't understand what that meant. Every accent I used was wrong, too foreign, too heavy, too something. But one day, a professor asked if he could record me for research. He said it was for a paper on phonetic diversity. I agreed. I trusted him." Her eyes didn't leave Turner's face. He froze, his pen snapping in his hand. "Then," she continued, "I found my voice, my actual recordings, online. Stripped of my name, labeled as case study samples from non-native anomalies. Used in lectures, analyzed in conferences. My voice was his data, my accent was his specimen." Gasps rippled across the rows. Turner's mouth opened, then closed. His throat moved like he was swallowing stones. Ross's eyes hardened. "Professor Turner, would you like to comment?" Turner's voice came out thin. This is nonsense. Students volunteer for phonetic surveys all the time. It's educational." "Without consent?" Ross asked. "That's ridiculous, Turner began. "You uploaded it to the university archive under a pseudonym," Ross said, lifting the folder. "And then used excerpts in your public seminars to demonstrate what you called linguistic inferiority markers." The words dropped like lead into the air. The audience erupted. Shouts, whispers, phones rising to record. Turner tried to speak, but his voice was drowned by the swell of sound. Lina stood motionless, her mind suspended between disbelief and vindication. The laughter, the humiliation, the endless corrections, suddenly illuminated by a single brutal truth. She had never been mocked for her mistakes, but because someone needed her small enough to study. Ross raised a hand and the noise faded. "Miss Morais," he said softly, "you don't have to continue." But Lina did, not out of defiance, out of necessity. Her voice trembled, then steadied. "You wanted performance?" she said, turning to Turner. "Then listen. This is what you never heard." She switched accents seamlessly, not to impress but to expose. Each voice she summoned was someone she'd met, someone who had taught her something real. A fisherman from Cork, a migrant worker from Cape Town, a teacher from Ontario. She spoke their sentences, their truths, their laughter, their pain. "These voices aren't tricks," she said between breaths. "They are people. They are lives." The crowd had gone still. Even Turner couldn't look away. "You called it imitation," she said, "but imitation is survival. When you move through places that reject you, you learn to change your sound before they change their tone." Her final words landed like an earthquake. "Every accent I learned was a door I built out of someone else's prison." Silence. Pure, heavy, sacred silence. Then, from the back row, a slow clap. One, then two, then an entire wave of applause. Some stood, some cried. Emily didn't move, her face pale, unreadable. Ross closed his folder and nodded once. "That will do," he said quietly. "We'll be in touch, Professor Turner." Security entered. Turner tried to protest, words spilling, jargon, denials, excuses. But they fell apart as the applause swallowed him whole. Lina stood at center stage, heart hammering, hands trembling. She wasn't smiling. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a wound finally releasing years of blood. As the auditorium emptied, Ross approached her. "You have quite a gift," he said. "It's not a gift," she replied. "It's a defense mechanism." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." She looked past him at the now empty stage, the microphone still humming faintly. The place where she had been humiliated, tested, and finally heard. But somewhere deep inside, she knew it wasn't over. Because when someone like Turner falls, the echoes don't die quietly. They spread. And the next voice they tried to silence might not survive the noise. The night after the auditorium felt like a city after sirens, quiet on the surface, flashing underneath. Lina walked home in the drizzle with the program still folded in her pocket, the word voice bleeding where the water had found it. Her phone vibrated until it felt like a trapped insect in her hand. Messages from classmates she barely knew, strangers from other departments. A cautious official note from the dean's office requesting a calm conversation on Monday. A handful of anonymous messages hissed through the noise like steam, mockery in lowercase, threats in uppercase. A link to a forum thread where her name had been turned into an adjective, Lina'd, meaning corrected in public with proof. Language was already metabolizing what happened to her. It always did. That was both the magic and the disease. Sleep came like a thief and left before dawn. She woke to rain and to a new email. Subject, preservation interview. It was from Ross. A line of courtesy, an invitation, a meeting time, then a sentence that felt less like a request and more like an omen. "Bring anything you've kept." There was so much she had kept, not out of strategy, out of fear. Her hard drive was a cemetery of moments, voice memos of late-night vowel drills, video snippets of her mouth shaping rhotic R's, notes on vowel shifts marked with times and places and names she never shared aloud. And there were the other files, the ones she hadn't made, the clips of Turner's seminars someone had sent her at 2 a.m., time-stamped. His voice looping the phrase linguistic inferiority markers until meaning drained out of it and something uglier showed through. If Ross needed proof, the ghosts were ready. The bureau office was an old post office turned into a quiet labyrinth. Dusty light, the faint scent of wood polish, a receptionist who looked like she'd been still even when she was moving. Ross led Lina down a narrow hall into a room with a circular table and a recorder in the center. The walls were lined with shelves holding small black cases labeled by region and year, a library of voices, archived against the slow forgetting that eats languages from the inside. "You can sit," he said, as if she might float away. She placed a small thumb drive on the table. He added a folder. He didn't open either yet. For a while, they simply listened to the building breathe. "Before we begin," Ross said, "you should know something about our work. We catalog and protect speech communities that are disappearing. Oral histories, endangered dialects, micro-accents that never had a name until the people who used them were almost gone. We've been following Professor Turner's public lectures for a year. We suspected misuse. Your testimony aligned with things we couldn't file without a witness. So I'm a witness, Lina said. You're more than that, he replied. You're proof that what he calls performance is survival, and you're the one he chose to make small. Her jaw tightened. He didn't choose me. He chose the weakest person in the room. Ross looked at her for a long time. Are you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He opened the folder. Copies of consent forms, blank where signatures should have been, screenshots of uploads to a private academic server, minutes from a departmental meeting in which Turner presented anonymized samples that weren't anonymous at all, just stripped. There were emails, gathered by request, not by surveillance, where he described students as rich raw material. In another, he asked a conference organizer for a keynote slot. He attached a deck with a title that made Lina's stomach go cold. Owning the Accent, Managing Deviance in the Modern Classroom. Ross pushed the papers forward as if they might bite him if he kept them too close. We're moving officially, he said, but institutions are slow creatures. They bleed blame out in tiny drops. In the meantime, I'm a headline, Lina said. A case, a cautionary tale. In the meantime, Ross repeated, you have a decision. He tapped the recorder. Tell me what you want this to become. It was a trap, but not the kind Turner set. This one was generous and therefore dangerous. She could weaponize herself or she could spend herself. Both required bleeding. She thought of the auditorium, the moment the room had turned, the woman from Paisley, the man from Joburg, the applause that had sounded like rain finally choosing a gutter. She thought of Emily's eyes, no longer bright, just stunned. At the center of a life built on the belief that correctness made you safe, she thought of her grandmother's kitchen, of soft dumplings and hard R's, of laughter that healed what it broke. I want them to listen, she said, but not to me, to each other. Ross nodded as if he had expected that. He slid the folder closer. Then you'll need this. Inside lay a letter of censure drafted but unsigned, a transcript from Turner's last closed workshop, and something else, an audio file burned to a disk like a relic. From a conference 2 months ago, Ross explained. He didn't know he was being recorded. Listen to track 3? Lina put on the headphones. Turner's voice filled her skull, measured, courtly even as it cut. We must train the ear to hear deficiency as deviance, not difference. She stopped the audio and removed the headphones slowly, as if the words might have left residue. How do I fight a sentence like that? She asked. You don't, Ross said. You replace it. The campus turned feral in the days that followed. Not violent, just hungry. Information fed it. Rumor fattened it. The dean called an emergency forum for Thursday. Flyers went up in the same font that had advertised the demonstration. Listening session, pedagogy, consent, bias. The phrase listening session tasted like a sedative. Lina prepared anyway. In the meantime, Turner sued the Bureau. He retained counsel. He released a statement through a friend. The seminar was taken out of context. He recorded a podcast with a sympathetic academic influencer titled The Death of Classroom Authority, where he never said her name, but described a student who weaponized performance to smear me. He sat in a soft chair and said into a soft microphone, We are living in a time when emotional narratives override empirical rigor. Each word polished, each word a finger on a scale. The Bureau's statement was dry and precise. The university's was cautious. Students made posters anyway. A faculty coalition drafted a petition for Turner's suspension pending review. The comments section refused to be pending anything. It judged in real time. Emily DM'd Lina a single sentence. I didn't know about the recordings. It wasn't exactly an apology. Lina didn't reply, not because she was cruel. Because she didn't trust language to hold them yet. The rope would burn both palms. On Tuesday, Ross texted, Check your campus email. The dean had sent an agenda for the forum. There was a panel of 5. 2 faculty, 1 administrator, 1 outside ethics consultant, and a slot simply labeled student narrative. No name, no protection. A delicate way to invite someone to stand on a stage as an idea while pretending she was invisible. "Take it," Ross advised, "on your terms." So she did what she had always done. She turned preparation into armor. She braided voices. She called friends in 3 countries and asked for sentences in their dialects that felt like home. She recorded a nurse's chant from Glasgow for a frightened child, a fisherman's weather conjuring from Cork, a shopkeeper's apology from Joburg that meant "I see you as well as I'm sorry." She stitched them together with her own English, the standard, then the softened, then the sharpened, so that anyone listening would fall through registers like rooms in a house that barely held. She titled the piece 5 Rooms. She would not explain them. She would open them and let people walk. The forum filled early. Noonlight cut the hall into precise rectangles as if it were trying to argue for order. Lina sat in the front row with her headphones around her neck, the recorder in her lap. Turner wasn't on the stage, but his absence hung over it like a shadow drawn to the edge of a portrait. The dean spoke first, using words like gravity and care and context as if they might perform triage. A senior professor followed, invoking tradition with a gentleness that was almost a threat. The ethics consultant presented a slide. Consent is a process, not a checkbox. The room took notes it would forget. "Student narrative," the dean said at last, and Lina stood. The microphone was lighter than the one in the auditorium, as if it knew it might have to be carried farther. "I was asked to tell a story," she began. "But stories are always accused of being emotional, as if emotions were untrustworthy witnesses. So I brought you something else." She pressed play. The room filled with breath. Not words at first, breath that had shape. A hush belonging to a particular street at a particular hour, the scrape of a chair across a kitchen tile, that could only happen in a house where the door sticks in summer. Then the voices entered, one by one, not in order of prestige but in order of need. A lullaby no textbook would transcribe. A joke not funny unless you'd stood in that shop with rain in your shoes. A weather warning that was also a warning about people. Lina didn't narrate. She listened with them. When the last voice faded, she didn't fill the silence. She let it ring. "This is proficiency," she said finally. "Not in grammar, in witness. If you can't hear the difference between a person and a sample, you shouldn't be teaching language. If you can't hear the difference between a door and a lock, you shouldn't be measuring anyone's mouth." A hand rose in the 3rd row. "How do we teach standards without enforcing shame?" "You don't teach standards first," Lina replied. "You teach ears." A murmur of approval that sounded tired and hopeful at once. After the forum, the dean shook her hand with both of his. "We're forming a task force. We'd value your input." The phrase "your input" made her feel like a form field. She nodded anyway. Sometimes change needs paperwork to survive. Turner's lawyer sent a letter warning of defamation if she continued a campaign of reputational harm. The Bureau's counsel replied with exhibits and a threat of its own. A public records request on every lecture, and every grant where he'd promised one thing and done another. The lawyer fight would be slow and sterile. The fight in the hallways would not. In the days that followed, something strange happened in classrooms across campus. Students began to speak in the voices they brought from home, not as rebellion, as practice. A boy from Queens presented in a rhythm like a train's 3rd rail and then translated his cadence into standard English. A girl from Rio spoke of inflection like tide. A kid from the Fens joked he had subtitles for everything, and then didn't need them. Teachers who were listening changed their assignments. Those who weren't complained about chaos. Either way, the volume of the building shifted. It was less about loudness and more about presence. Emily found Lina by the library steps on a wind-peeled afternoon. No makeup, no armor. "I messed up," she said. "I laughed because I thought that made me safe. I didn't know he was using you. I should have known." Lina waited. "Apologies are bridges. You test each plank before you cross." "I can help," Emily added. "There are messages, things he sent, times he rehearsed us to make you look a certain way." She swallowed. "I kept them." "Why?" Lina asked. "Because I'm a coward," Emily said. And because something told me I might need them later. This is later. They sat together for a long time. The wind wrote its own script in the ivy. When they rose, they were not friends. They were co-conspirators in repair. By the end of the month, Turner was placed on administrative leave. It wasn't victory. It was a comma. He would land somewhere. People like him always did. But the archive he'd built in secret was now an exhibit under lock and ethics review. The recordings he'd taken without permission were sequestered. A new policy passed with uncharacteristic speed. Student voices are not institutional property. The line was ordinary and revolutionary in the same breath. Ross offered Lina a consultant role at the Bureau. Part-time, flexible, funded, he said. We could use someone who knows how to make listening public. She accepted, not for the title, but for the cases in the corner. Little black boxes with the names of towns that had never been on a map. She wanted to carry them. She wanted to keep them from going quiet. The first workshop she ran wasn't on accent performance. It was called Borrowed Mouths. She borrowed a community hall, set up 6 chairs in a circle, and asked everyone to bring a sentence that someone they loved had said in a voice no one else could do right. They practiced saying those sentences in their own mouths without losing the original shape. They failed tenderly, they laughed, they cried, they tried again. At the end, an older man lingered by the door. My wife died last year, he said. I haven't heard her voice in months. He touched his chest. Tonight I did. A reporter came. The article was small and careful and didn't call her a star. It called her a teacher. It felt like being given back something she had almost forgotten. On the last night of the term, Lina returned to classroom 204. The fan still complained. The chalk tray was a graveyard of pale bones. She opened the window. The building exhaled. She spoke into the empty room in 5 dialects and then in none. She wasn't practicing. She was taking attendance. She was calling roll on every voice she had carried in her body like a smuggled flame. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ross. You'll want to hear this. Podcast just dropped an unedited cut. Lina pressed play. Turner's voice again, less polished, the veneer cracked by consequence. I thought I owned the room. I didn't notice when the room changed hands. The host tried to rescue him with a joke. He didn't laugh. For the first time, Lina didn't feel anger. She felt the complicated mercy of proportion. He had been big because the room had been small. She had made the room larger. That was all. She closed the window. The echo that answered wasn't cruel. It was the building getting used to a new pitch. Weeks later, when the case turned formal and statements were sworn, Lina's section read like music notation. Not because it was flowery, because it understood breath. She had learned the most dangerous dialect of all, the one that makes power legible. And in the years that followed, because there were years, she would find herself on other stages, in other rooms, choosing not to turn voices into spectacle but to turn silence into shelter. People would ask her the same question in kinder words. How did you do it? She would always answer the same way. I listened. There was a rumor that the day Turner cleaned out his office, quietly, no scene, no eyes, he found a slip of paper tucked under his keyboard. It was a transcript of a single sentence, a scrawl in his own hand from a workshop years ago. Teach the ear before the mouth. It was crossed out. Someone had written beside it in another ink. Or the mouth will teach you. Lina never claimed credit. She didn't need it. The work was happening in rooms she'd never enter. The echo had learned to travel without her. Because the truth was never that she spoke 5 dialects. It was that she taught a room that had mocked her to speak one language it had forgotten it knew. Listening.